Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Ohoro, and this is Adaptable Behavior Explained. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today to Adaptable. I'm Kelly Ohoro, your host, and I'm so excited to have you here for a topic that's got a lot of buzz in the mental health field right now, and that's the subject of ketamine assisted psychotherapy. I have with me a friend and colleague, Dr. Shahnaz, who I worked with for 7.5 years. She worked at Infinite Healing and Wellness with me and continued on her own to go do her own thing now. And I'm so excited to have you here today. So thank you for being here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm Dr. Eddy. I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and I focus on integrative care and holistic care.
Awesome. And if you want to learn more about that, we have another episode that was back in the deck before this one dropped. So check that one out for more on Dr. Eddy and integrative healthcare and a whole slew of great nuggets of information related to psychotropics and mental health care. But today we're going to zero in on ketamine assisted psychotherapy. And so tell me a little bit about your history and what made you decide you wanted to go get trained to be a prescriber in this arena.
Well, I think that the research is robust, and I was having clients come in to see me that had already had an experience with ketamine, and they were showing such improvement with their anxiety levels, improved sleep, decreased emotional reactivity. And so that really got me interested in what does it really look like? What does it do to your brain? And how can I help more clients kind of reach their best self?
Right. It's funny. Infinite Healing and Wellness was late to the game on this, and I was really phobic. I didn't want to jump in and be, like too fast on this bandwagon because I've always been kind of a thinker of, you can't put a Band-Aid on a broken ankle. You've got to do the heavy lifting and do the hard work to get to healing and wholeness. And I'm also not a fan of like popping on a quick fix because I think that that's one of the main problems in our culture and country in general is like everybody doesn't want to do the hard thing to get to the good place.
Right.
And so I was really reluctant to go and research. And I think about 6 years into its popularity increasing, I was like, I've got to figure this out because I'm seeing the changes and the research cannot be denied.
Right.
And so I went ahead and went and got trained. And talk about humbling experience in like I thought I understood helping trauma work, and then I learned this. And is neurogenic the right word for it? Like the pathways that develop so quickly.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's the wonderful thing about ketamine is that you were saying, we have to do the hard work. And yet when clients are using ketamine as a tool in their integration process and they're just processing their trauma, it actually really helps them process in a way where it's more comfortable. I don't know how to explain that, but
so it's an anxiolytic. And so, when you think about the benefit of ketamine assisted psychotherapy, because it's an anxiolytic, clients will, at the onset of doing this kind of treatment, they tend to be anxious. But because of the anxiolytic properties, they are not anxious while doing the experience, which I think is so wonderful. And I think that's one of the benefits that you likely have seen so much of too. But the other piece that I think has been so beautiful, and I'm sure you could attest to that too, is the defenses that are part of the the makeup of our trauma work and our walls and our protectors from like IFS language, our managers, all of these things that get in the way and keep us maybe too intellectual in our trauma work or whatever else. It sets that default mode down.
It's a good way to put it. I think we could say something like it helps decrease the rigidity with the thought patterns and processes that are associated with those feelings and emotions and that are associated with that trauma.
Right. And so when you think about all the work people want to do, I've experienced, their head gets it.
Right.
Their head is there. They're like, I've done all this EMDR with you, Kelly. We've been at this for a long time. I just want my body to be freaking caught up with what my head knows to be true. And we're doing all of this, integrative work with IFS and parts work related to and somatic experiencing and things like that in conjunction with my EMDR approach. And getting them in to do ketamine assisted psychotherapy, it just softens all those walls and people fly through their EMDR work.
Right.
If they've done a lot of the pre-work for sure. Right. What's been your experience with patients who maybe didn't do a lot of, I think it can happen both ways. People want to, at the onset, do ketamine-assisted psychotherapy and then do more of the EMDR work. Or in my experience, my clients have mostly done a lot of EMDR first and then have done some ketamine assisted psychotherapy after that, what would you say would be pros and cons to either approach?
So I think the approach that I like best and the approach that I think has the best outcomes, it's for clients that have already gone through a lot of the processing and have a lot of experience with
Right.
EMDR, somatic work, or just building the skills that they need in general, right? So when they're not just jumping into ketamine and expecting it all to just happen naturally, that's when we're seeing most of those really robust responses where clients are just feeling better in general. They're able to titrate down on medication, they're sleeping better, they're just in a better place emotionally.
Yeah, I would say that I totally agree with that. It's almost like if they have an understanding of their internal landscape, how they work, why they work the way they work, a bit about their history and why they respond the way that they do in certain experiences with with environmental triggers and how they show up. And they have such an acute awareness, or an astute awareness might be a better way to say it, of what's happening. And then they can drop in their ketamine experiences with, a specific setting, intention, and be able to really lean in such a more vulnerable way. I've seen such beautiful outcomes. And as a therapist, I think what's been really cool is dropping expectations and really having to model that for a client when they have all of these desires of what
They want it to look like.
yeah, and every time is different. With every
It
patient
is.
is different. Like there's no, I really got nothing for you. When they go, what do
Right.
you think's going to happen? I can go, I can tell you what happened for me.
Yeah.
I went through the whole 6 series, done a couple of touch ups, and I can tell you what that was like. But everybody in our cohort, and there were 8 of us, had a different experience every single time. And so it's not predictable, which is maybe part of what we want to look at is like, it's okay to not need to know.
Exactly. Yeah,
Which
I
is our
agree
stuff.
with that. And I think if clients have a background with IFS work,
Right.
that really helps them understand the process and really helps with the integration piece.
Right. Just for those of you who aren't familiar with IFS, that stands for Internal Family Systems. It's an approach, a theory of an approach. It's not of pathology like of structural dissociation or what have you, but it's a theory on how we can approach parts of self where we have developed adaptations that are not serving us and they're defensive in nature and they're really meant to be temporary at the time of the events or the experiences or navigating our familial experiences that are perceived as dangerous. And we adapt so that we can navigate these situations and then we bring those adaptations into our current life experiences, and oftentimes those things are in the way, like getting too angry or shutting down and getting too small or being frenetically anxious in the absence of someone in a more preoccupied anxious attachment way. So with IFS we address the internal workings, and so I think you're right, the knowledge of what's going on in me as a client gives me a lot more insight as to what I would like to address.
When you're going through the process of the
So, talk to us about some, maybe even thinking of a case example where you were like night and day from the work you had done. You knew they were doing work with an EMDR therapist, and then you saw, a pretty specific or outstanding change. Can you talk about a client?
Yeah. So I'm thinking of one particular client who, for years and years, has just had the worst sleep, regardless of, medication that they've been on, whether that's benzos or hypnotics or antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds, has been through a plethora of therapy, EMDR processing, pretty significant trauma history, and sleep has always been the biggest challenge. So for a very long time, she kind of resisted, whether or not ketamine was the right thing, feeling very anxious about, the dissociation that could occur and what that would look like for
I
her.
mean, it's a dissociative, so that's
Yes.
that's happening.
Yes. So once she went through the full 6 sessions, she has actually gotten off of most of her medication. The most important thing, she's gotten off of her sleep meds. So right now we're just doing supportive care and she's doing wonderful and she's able to shut her brain off at night. She's able to sleep through the night and she doesn't have, that fight or flight
Right.
is just, it's turned off a little bit. She's able to sit within herself and, when triggers come up, she's able to identify what it is that's bothering her and not ruminate about it right before she sleeps.
Right. There's more space between that stimulus and her response so that she can kind of attest to the truth of her current reality, right?
Right.
So awesome. I think that it got a lot of buzz because my experience has been, the big push for ketamine assisted psychotherapy started with ketamine clinics that are primarily run by anesthesiologists.
Right.
And so they don't have any mental health training background, integrative work with trauma. Like, yeah, they know how to administer a medication, but they don't understand that, like, a lot of this trauma happened in the absence of a caregiver that was supportive or safe. And so if they're going into a dissociative state in a dark room by themselves, that's terrifying. And so I became interested in becoming trained primarily because we were kind of cleaning up the mess of people who had gone that route,
Right.
desperate for help, desperate for support. And at the same time, they got the autonomic nervous system reset, but they were kind of additionally traumatized by the experience because they felt alone. And sometimes you feel a little untethered in that experience. And I mean, it's so beautiful to be able to put your hand out and have someone who's a grounding element of safety and trust and support with you in that experience. So maybe talk to us a little bit about any clients you've had that have gone either route and what their experiences have been.
So similarly, I've had clients that have gone through like the intravenous ketamine process, right? And both that were, suicidal at the time, depressed, or having really significant trauma responses. And their experience has been completely different, doing the intravenous versus doing like the oral or the intramuscular route with a therapist, actually going through the reintegration process. Whereas
That's
when
everything.
they did the intravenous route, it was exactly what you said. They went in there, they did the treatment, and that was it. There was no follow-up to that. And so they weren't able to process what they experienced and those memories and feelings and emotions. They just kind of sat with those. And that's not really beneficial.
Yeah, and we're not bringing like, heart to mind and connecting the body to the mind. And the other thing I love about it is I really believe in the triad of healing. It's mental, it's physical, it's spiritual. And I think the part of this that gives us access to this other dimension of imagination and, elements of the experience that as a therapist, I would never even consider saying. And also, how dare I? Because who am I to say what your spiritual, travel should look like? And so for the fact that this gives us access to like that inner self in a way that just talk therapy or bottom up therapies just don't give us access to me has been so beautiful. And I know that in my own experience, I'll share a little bit about it. One of my sessions, I was trying to figure out. It was actually input from one of my sons. He says, "Mom, you come in too hot. You've got all these opinions about what it is you think I need to be doing, and what I make up about it is you don't trust me that I'll figure it out, or if I do mess up, that I'll be able to be resilient enough to figure it out." And I was like, "Whoa, that's a hard message as a mom to hear." And he's so right. And so he told me that in between our first and our second experience, and I went in and I was like, I need to explore this because the last thing that I want is for someone that I love to feel reluctant to come to me about things because of the way that I, in a way make it about me because I'm anxious that he's going to have a hard thing. And I try to insert my opinion and I don't stay in my lane and all of those things. And so I went in and I was like, what is the part of me that does that? And what is that about? And I had the most wild and beautiful experience in that I turned into a lion and he turned into a lion and all of the lions of my family with their normal faces and then like lion manes. And I mean, it's so, you can't make this up. And I have no affinity towards, wild cats, but it just happened. And I think that's because my intuitive self needed to see what a strong, powerful mother looked like that doesn't need to go micromanage every moment. And to see that in the state of a lioness, I was like, oh, she's a badass. She is in charge, but she lets them have their moments. Like they fall down and she's kind of like smack, and it was beautiful because just being able to internalize that was a total spiritual experience for me. And not that I'm a lioness, but it gave me a really physical, real world example of what it is I would like to try to embody when interfacing and with people that I love. And no talk therapist or no EMDR therapy session was going to turn me into a lioness, So anyway, I think that spiritual component has been so important.
That definitely resonates with me. I mean, my experience was motherhood and grief. And so my experience was beautiful as well, just kind of coming to a point or just this moment in time when I did my own treatment that, I was worthy of being a mother. I can be a good mother. I can be in, still have this motherly presence. and still do all the other things that I want to do and need to do. So
Yeah, there's such a even in the thing in motherhood, interestingly, that both of our intentions were around motherhood, and I think that just as business women who have positions of power, who are strong in our own right, and then the softening that is really best when it comes to being a good mother
Right.
and like that nurturing side. There's a lot to balance in that.
Absolutely.
And a lot to question in ourselves. So I'm so glad for you that you were able to kind of maybe pull from more of that grounded self energy, that confidence that exists in you, but that you were able to harness in a better way. That's awesome.
It's wonderful.
That's so beautiful. So anything you'd caution about people seeking this kind of treatment or rule out so that people can kind of determine if this might be a fit for them?
Right. So clients who have a history like cardiac illness can sometimes be a red flag, and that varies from person to person. Actively high blood pressure is a big no-no. So if you're seeking, to do that in the future, having your blood pressure under control is really, really important.
And that means with medication. It's
With
okay if it's
medication,
medication
absolutely.
managed, right? Okay.
It's okay if it's medication managed. And there are some safeguards that, are taken, like taking your blood pressure before treatment and making sure that you're not above a certain number,
Right.
so that you can do that safely. And also any clients that have a history of psychosis. So it doesn't mean that you cannot do it. It just means that during your ketamine treatment, you would have to be on like a mood stabilizer to help you stabilize your mood while you're going through that treatment.
Got it. Oh, that's good to know. I hadn't heard that part of things. So that's great. Well, is there anything else we need to make sure our audience knows related to this topic? I've got 2 other episodes about this. So please, if you're interested and you're really doing your research, check those out. But is there anything else we need to make sure we share with them?
I think most clients, when they go through it, they say it really is a mental reset, and I think that piggybacking off of that, it's really that glutamate surge that occurs that basically promotes neuroplasticity.
Right.
And so when we're going through therapy, for those of us that have, a trauma background or whatever the case may be, you can process it to a certain degree, but our brain doesn't. I mean, it does change. I don't want to say it doesn't, because with EMDR it does change. It definitely changes, but it occurs at a faster rate, with ketamine. And so I think that's wonderful, knowing that you can go into something and that there's actually the neuroplasticity occurs as you're going through it, and it can really just be a reset for your life and everything.
Awesome. I can't say enough about it with clients. And I know that there has to be predicating factors to encourage a client to go through this kind of treatment for it to be prescribed and for a prescriber to ethically be able to do so.
Right.
But I got to say that if not for those red tape moments, I really think anyone who has the resources and the time who's had any sort of trauma, like what a beautiful avenue to go to be able to kind of see that side of things from that deeply spiritual internal perspective that we just can't get access to very easily. And it's so robust and so powerful. So
Agreed.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here. I love talking with you. I feel like we could do a whole other show on just our experiences and what that was like to give people an opportunity.
I appreciate you inviting me, and I'm happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. Thank you. So hopefully that gave you guys some good nuggets to take back to your research board related to your potential getting psychotherapy via ketamine assisted psychotherapy. Like I said, I had 2 other episodes that we did related to this topic, so please feel free to check out my channel, Adaptable Behavior Explained, and do your research, and hopefully you'll find someone that is doing the work with you as opposed to separate integration at a later date. I find that a much more powerful experience if you have the ability to do that. So thank you so much for tuning in today. Until we meet again, don't forget to lead with love. It'll never steer you wrong.